Yes.
Welcome to Larry the Alchemist, and welcome to another edition of Dudes Talking Metal. This is where I get together some of the most knowledgeable heavy metal dudes out there, and we get together with you to talk all things heavy metal and hard rock. We have our honorary dudes here, Tony, Darren, and Butch, as well as me, the Alchemist. And the topic for today is kind of a two-part topic. We're going to be discussing first an artist that the first album we bought from that artist maybe wasn't the best album to buy. Maybe it didn't totally represent that band or that artist. Maybe it prevented us a little bit from getting into that artist or slowed us down a little bit. Kind of a bad entry point into a particular artist. And then we're going to be sharing with you also a band or an artist and an album that we feel you should avoid. Maybe we didn't fall into the trap, but the dudes here, we're always looking out for everybody out there. We don't want anybody to make any mistakes when you're trying to navigate certain bands' catalogs. So we're going to be helping you out there when we go around here with the second part of our topic. So, all right, gentlemen, Tony, what's a album for you that was maybe the wrong place to start for a particular artist or band?
Okay, the band I picked is UFO. And the first time that I actually heard some UFO was this compilation cassette. It's called Metal Killers Collection. It has a whole bunch of like new wave of British metal bands. And then it's got some bands like Uriah Heep, Judas Priest, and UFO, Michael Schenker. Some older groups are on here as well. So I was introduced to a lot of stuff from this series. It's actually a two cassette series. So I'd heard Boogie with George by UFO, which comes from their early pre Michael Schenker days. So it's more of a, they called it space rock. It was kind of psychedelic blues, and Boogie with George is a blues track. And I also heard Michael Schenker on here doing Armed and Ready, which I loved. So I was in a record store and I saw this UFO album, and actually, I had bought it on cassette. This is the vinyl version. I was foolish enough to buy it again on vinyl, but I bought this on cassette. It's UFO Live, and it's the early days, like 19. I guess it's like 1972, and with the original lineup, which is still Phil Mogg, Andy Parker, and Pete Way, but I believe it's the guitarist is maybe is Mick Bolton on it, and it's the spacey rock, psychedelic meets like blues rock, boogie rock, and just was not what I was expecting. Even though I had already heard this one song, I had been reading a little bit in some magazines. I was about 18 at the time and getting into some different stuff, and I had guy had recommended, yeah, get some UFO. They're a great band. Michael Schenker's such a great guitarist. So I started out with that one, and it just didn't do anything for me at all. And I remember I didn't give up on them. I went back to that same record store not long after that, and I picked up Phenomena on cassette,
Nice.
and which is my favorite UFO album to this date. I just love it. That's the one with Doctor on it, and it's just it's just a great record. And so Rock Bottom's on that one as well. So that was I ventured into the good side of UFO, and then I think the next one I got was Strangers in the Night. So yeah, it just exploded from there. But yeah, this is definitely not a great record to start with. But over the years, I kind of started liking some of the space rock stuff that they did. It's kind of cool. It's different, and I have those first couple of records, and it's not bad. It's just different. They really
Yeah.
hadn't found their way yet, and they hadn't come in to be the UFO that we would come to know and love.
Yeah.
So definitely not the one to start out with, but yeah, UFO Live in Japan is where I started. So that's my pick.
A lot of bands back then in the 70s. And I forgot to mention at the beginning of the show, make sure you check out our Dudes Talking Metal playlist on Spotify. We'll take a song from each one of the albums that we mention here. Every week we add a song or two from whatever the topic is that we're discussing. A lot of bands from like the late 60s through, gosh, maybe the mid 70s, even sort of towards the later 70s, it was almost acceptable back then for a band to not really find themselves until their second, third album. And so there's tons of bands where their first couple albums are them sort of searching around. You think of like early Thin Lizzy, early UFO. They just haven't found themselves yet. And that was okay back then. But by the time you get to the late 70s, 80s, it's kind of like the record labels are expecting bands to sort of their first, especially nowadays, there's no time for a band to mess around with different styles and do different things. But back then it was pretty common for a band's first couple records to not sound like what the classic era of the band, and UFO is a great example of that. Cool. All right, Darren, what do you got?
All right. Well, going back to 1976, I came down with a fever that lasted for actually a couple years. It was called Kiss Fever. As most people my age, in and around that time, came
Rock
down
and
with as
roll
well.
pneumonia.
Yeah, Kiss Fever. Everything was all about Kiss. And it was actually the first, I wouldn't say it was the first hard rock thing that I heard, but it was probably the first hard rock band album. The album was Rock and Roll Over. That was the first one I got. It was the first one I saw without any influence, wanted to get, and it became they were my band for the better part of 2 years. Uh, in my neighborhood, and it was right around 1978. It was after the solo albums came out, and the solo albums were hit or miss. I mean, of course, I liked Ace Frehley's album. I liked Paul Stanley's album. I hated Peter Chris's album. I still do, and I wasn't really crazy about Gene Simmons' album. So, with the advent of the solo albums, my interest started to wane, and my friends were introducing me to things like this is 1978. My friends were introducing me to things that their older brothers were turning them on to, stuff like Aerosmith, Van Halen. The first Van Halen album had only been out for a few months. Rush, Hemispheres was the new release from Rush. People were buying that. Uh, Alice Cooper. And I liked Alice Cooper. I liked the theatrics. It wasn't too far removed from Kiss. It was a little bit more mature in some ways. But I could relate to Alice Cooper because there was the theatrics and the makeup and the stage show and all that stuff. So I was cool with Alice Cooper. But I was in school and I was looking through a book in the library. It was like rock music or rock music of the 70s. And of course, it was like a who's who of all these different bands that were popular in the 70s, like Queen and Aerosmith and ZZ Top. And one of the bands was Black Sabbath. And the picture looked really cool. And I still see it from time to time. And on the internet, it'll pop up on Facebook or something like that. And it was like one of the promo pictures from Sabbath Bloody Sabbath, where Ozzy has like the big fur coat, and it's like a camera looking down on them, and they're all looking up. Ozzy has like this big fur coat, and they're all kind of like on either side of Ozzy, and Ozzy looked like this barbarian warrior or something. The band looked cool, and I liked the name of the band. But no one in my neighborhood had mentioned anything about Black Sabbath. So I'm like, Black Sabbath, this is going to be my band. This is going to be the band that I'm going to buy and I'm going to turn everybody on to. And I'm going to be the guy that turned everybody on to Black Sabbath. I'm going to be the Black Sabbath guy. So a few days later, went to the record store and Never Say Die had been out for a few months. And the record store had a promo poster and some cover flash. They had a little mini display for Never Say Die. So that was the Black Sabbath album. I saw it, it looked cool. The album cover looked pretty cool. I bought it. I took it home. I was really excited. This is going to blow me away. This is going to be the heaviest thing I've ever heard. And it wasn't. Not at all. There was really nothing about it that I even really could relate to. The music it wasn't heavy, at least not in the way that I thought it was going to be heavy. I got all the way through the albums. I kept thinking, well, one song's going to be better than the next. I got all the way through side one, flipped it over, got to side two. And the one thing that really turned me off and pretty much made me sideline the album for about 2.5 years was the song Breakout. As soon as I heard the saxophones, I was like, I was out. I was like, Black Sabbath they're just not my band. I just don't like Black Sabbath. So as time went on, in a couple of years, I heard, I think it was an advertisement for Blizzard of Oz. It was 1980, or maybe it was Ozzy. And it might have been closer to 81. I don't remember the specific year, but I heard an advertisement on the radio, and I heard a couple seconds of Paranoid, and I just, wow, what was that? And I had to find that album, and I went through the next album, as luck would have it, was Paranoid. So I bought that 2 years later, and that album I just took to. I loved it, but it was just by chance, because if I hadn't heard that advertisement, if I hadn't heard that commercial, there's no way I was going to revisit Black Sabbath again. So, I mean, as we know now, I mean, I like Black Sabbath a lot. I mean, we, and the story, I mean, I referenced it a few times when we talked about Never Say Die. And I usually say, the irony for me and Black Sabbath is that the first time I heard them, I didn't like them. And if it would have been Paranoid or any other album, probably, even maybe Technical Ecstasy, I probably would have liked. But unfortunately, the first album I heard by Black Sabbath was Never Say Die, and that just kind of did it for me for like 2.5 years or something. So it's sort of ironic, but
What a close call with
that was the
destiny.
wrong album for me to
Yeah.
buy. That's my contribution to this discussion. The wrong album.
I
Never Say
can see
Die.
that too, because even though I like Never Say Die, it wasn't my
I like
first
it
Black
now.
Sabbath
Yeah.
album. It was the last Ozzy era album that I bought. So by that time, I was okay with Never Say Die. But if that was my
Right.
first Black Sabbath album, maybe if I had only heard Iron Man or Paranoid on the radio and then I heard that, it definitely would have thrown me for a loop. So I
You,
get
you
it.
know, uh, you guys know who King Valley is.
Hmm.
He tells the story in his autobiography. I thought was pretty funny. Was he said the first time he ever heard Black Sabbath was he was a kid and he was at his friend's house and they were going through his like Big Brother's 8-track tapes, and when you put a 8-track cartridge in, you really don't know where it's going to be, in
Uh-huh.
the program, and they just happened to put in Paranoid. Oh, Black Sabbath, this is cool. They stick it in the player and it just happens to be on Planet Caravan, and they're
Mhm.
like, what kind of hippie junk is this? They just took it out and went to the next tape. So for years he said he would see the name Black Sabbath and think that's that hippie band. And then when he heard Mob Rules and he's like, wow, this is
Yeah.
great.
That's funny.
Yeah,
Darren, your mic,
difference.
we're getting kind of a bad connection. So are you guys hearing that, or is just on my
Yeah,
end?
I was
Okay.
wondering if it was my earbuds.
Yeah, when we come around again, if it's still doing it, maybe we'll have you log out and log back in. It was mostly fine, but it was just breaking up on us every now and then.
Okay.
Okay. Butch, what's your pick?
All right. Um, I went with a band that when I was a teenager and I was just first starting to get into hard rock and metal, I was, in addition to grabbing tapes when I could or buying records, stuff that looked cool or stuff people told me about, or, I was grabbing magazines right and left too. And I'd gotten for instance, if there was a Cream magazine that came out that had, I still have a copy of it. It had there's a piece towards the back of it that was just like pages of them talking about the new wave of metal bands, not the British metal bands, but like just they called it the new wave metal or something like that. And it was like teeny little paragraph, Armored Saint,
Yeah, I
Warlord,
know
like
that
all these
issue.
bands, like it's like so but there was other, and there are other articles in the magazine, and I was buying, I had that, or I would buy Hit Parade or Circus, and one of the names that for whatever reason kept popping up in little side pieces. They were either talking about bands that had an image or bands with stage show or bands related to Kiss, and Jafria had put their first record out, and so I started to see the name of this band Angel pop up, and I was like intrigued by the description of the band. It sounded cool. I mean, it sounded like they had a cool image. Talking about the stage show, that sounded cool. The band was broken up though, but so I was up in New York City, and for whatever reason, I got it in my head like I'm gonna get an Angel record and see what it was. So I called, and there was a record store up there that had one of them. So we went by, and I grabbed it sight unheard, just based on this album cover. I mean, I knew where Greg was right away with the two-tone hair. So I bought this record. It was like $15 or something, and I had to wait. It was like an hour and a half, 2 hours home. I had to wait to put it on, and I don't know what I expected before I put this record on, but it wasn't what I got, because it's a pretty tame record compared to when you compare it to Motley Crue and Kiss and Judas Priest and the stuff from like 83 to 85 that was coming out, Rat and Talkin, and then even some of the heavier bands that were coming. It was kind of like really like kind of like tame and commercial, like that late 70s. But I hadn't explored 70s hard rock that much, so I hadn't gotten the full swing of things from where it started, like with the hard rock bands from like the mid 70s up through the late 70s, when bands were starting to like get a little bit more commercial. I didn't know the arc of the band's career, and honestly, it just didn't do much for me. Like, to me, the one song on it I kept going back to was LA Lady, because it was, I mean, fairly rocking. Bad Time I liked a lot. That one was the closest to like being heavy that the record had. It's not that I disliked this record, but it was like it didn't move the needle for me very much. I just kind of listened to it a couple times, stuck it on a shelf, and I don't know. It just was what it was. I thought, okay, well, that's $15, whatever. Worthy experiment. I checked it out, but I happened to be in a record store, I don't know, 4 or 5 months later, and I was flipping through the records. It was in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, and for $5 they had their live album. So I bought that and got that home, and the first song on there is Tower. And that song, when I heard that, I was like, holy crap. Like, it didn't even seem like the same band, really, which, I mean, if you put that material from what ended up, what would have been from the first record, like Tower and Rock and Rollers, against this record, like, you're like, that's not even the same band. But if so I got the live record. I loved that right away. A lot of the songs in there I thought were killer. The performances were cool. Then I got in a compilation that called for strictly for connoisseurs, that had like Stars and Angel, and had the studio version of Tower. So now I became obsessed. Like, once I heard Tower and heard the live record and the studio version, I'm like, I got to get all their records. So now it took me about a year, surprisingly, based on how often I see the records now, to find them. Back then it was frustrating trying to get them all, but when I got those first two records, I was like instantly besotted with the band, like totally in love with the band. They quickly became like, I mean, I listened to them more than probably anyone at the time. They weren't even together at the time. They were just like, I loved everything that they had going on. I love the interplay between the keys and the guitar. I love Frank's voice. Barry's a great drummer. I thought the songs were cool. Like, just some of that epic stuff, like the Fortune and songs like Just a Dream from the third record. So it took me like, I ended up getting them all. And over time, like, I would go back to this record. I had made like a tape for myself to put in that, your handy dandy yellow Sony Walkman, that had my favorite songs from each record. And I think there were like one or two from here. But over time, what happened was, the more I listened to this record and the more I like kind of expanded the kind of stuff I was into, and the more I get into, like power pop and things like that, I'm like, that drew me back to the songs on this record just after a while they just wormed their way in, and even though it wasn't heavy, um, just it's like great song after great song, like should have been hits kind of songs. Like, and to me, um, it's right behind the first two for me now. But at the time, like it didn't do much for me. Um, but the bands eventually became one of my favorite bands, and this is definitely one of my favorite records of this style of all time. I mean, I love all their records, but I don't know. I just
Do
there's
you think
something about the record now that and that over time just grabbed me. It's wimpy, but it's like I don't. It's more. It's not like I don't think it's wimpy in like in a bad way. It's wimpy in a those are great songs. They were desperately trying to have a hit. You know, Casablanca was pushing them.
Yeah.
They were popular as a touring band, but couldn't get that breakthrough. It's a shame they never did, but is what it is. So that's my first one. Just a band that didn't do it for me at first, that I bought on a whim, that you know, within a year or so actually became my favorite band,
Yeah.
or one of them.
do you think it was because you were into Kiss before you were an Angel, right? Do you think it was Kiss sort of steered you into the direction of Angel? Because
Yeah,
I
that was
remember I had a Cream magazine. It was a Cream close-up Kiss, and there was a section where it had other bands, and I wasn't really interested in any other bands. I was only interested in Kiss, but I saw pictures of Aerosmith, the Dictators, Angel, and Stars. And I think on the back cover there was an advertisement for On Earth as It Is in Heaven, and I thought the cover looked cool. I didn't get the album, but I remember that reading the magazines, picking up the magazines that had something with Kiss either on the cover or somewhere inside. There'd invariably be other groups within the magazine that would be trending at that time, or as popular, maybe not as popular, but popular at the time. And the one thing I remember was that Angel caught my interest from on a Kiss level because they were signed to the same record label, and I
mm-hmm.
think that the intention was for them to be like the anti-Kiss. Like Kiss was all black and silver,
Yeah.
and Angel
Yeah.
was white and angelic, and and I thought, oh well, I'll have to get around to checking out Angel. And I think I heard one song. I don't remember where I heard it, but I didn't like Frank's voice. It was something about. I mean, and he has a great voice, but he's one of those singers where it's like I think you either love him or you hate him. I don't know. I'm not sure I love him, but I've gotten more used to it. But
Yeah. Yeah, there
Angel
was
was definitely one of
definitely
those bands that seemed to be related to Kiss in a way.
there was definitely a Kiss connection with them
They
for
were
me.
managed by the same guy, right? Bill Aucoin.
No, they
Oh, they weren't?
Alcoin managed Kiss, and they were managed by a group called the Toby
Okay.
organization. Actually, Barry Levine wanted to manage them, and the band, like half the band, decided they want to go with this group instead out in California, and they, it was Punky brings it up in interviews that it was a mistake to not go with Levine's group. But the weird thing about it with me with these guys is I never actually saw a picture of the band until I picked this record up. It was just like descriptions of, I was like, being a Kiss fan, I loved like the whole idea of big stage
Yeah.
shows, and so they were like and I was into the image thing with bands, and it was these descriptions of the band or talking about the band's following and this stage show. But I didn't, I couldn't have told you when I first got this record. I couldn't have told you who was who other than Greg on the cut because I'd never seen a picture of him. So I was like thinking, oh, Punky Meadows is the wrong. I thought Felix Robinson on the cover was Punky Meadows, and I didn't know who was who.
Well, you
But
know
it was
how
just
I got into
interesting. Like I
Angel?
never saw them until I bought the record.
You know how I got into Angel was through Frank Zappa. And do you know what the
Punky's
Oh,
Whips.
connection?
Punky's Whips.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
Punkies. So I never knew what that meant. And I think I read an interview, or maybe it's in the liner notes, and it mentioned Punky from Angel. And when I started getting into buying records, like in 99, 2000, I remember seeing it in probably Double Decker in Allentown, and like, oh, Angel, that's that group. And I remember I liked them right away from the beginning because I was very much into Desolation Boulevard by Sweet. So I kind of liked that kind of kind of glammy, very melodic, but the guitars have this real, sound to them, like a metal guitar sound, but there's
Yeah.
harmonies and vocals and keyboards and everything. So when I heard it, I was like, oh wow, this reminds me of Sweet, Desolation Boulevard. I had an 8-track of Desolation Boulevard that an uncle had given me. So I was really excited when I sort of came across Angel. But
Another
okay.
Kiss connection they had too, besides I guess being on Casablanca, they probably had the same design company working for them, probably that Howard's Marks agency or something, because all the order forms and the Angel records always look like Kiss order forms, the same style.
Yeah.
And the Angel fan club, I think it was called the Angel Force or something.
Earth Force.
The Earth Force, yeah,
Yeah.
their fan club packet looked almost like identical to the Kiss Army packet with the 8x10 photos and the folder and
Wow.
everything. It was pretty much designed the same way. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay,
They
so for
tried hard.
me, I had heard about this band from from a few people. Steve Harris was always talking about this band like it was a huge influence on him. I'm talking about Wishbone Ash. So I had a friend that was like, "Oh, dude, if you like Thin Lizzy, you got to check out Wishbone Ash." And Steve Harris was always talking about Wishbone Ash. So I thought, oh, wow, this is probably like something like UFO or Thin Lizzy. It's going to be something in sort of that world. So when I first started getting into records, 99, 2000, I would sometimes I'm trying to remember how I got this particular record. I think this was the very, very early days of eBay, like when eBay first came out, because I remember I would order classic rock records and it would be like 20 records for $20. And it would just be like 20 classic rock records and it would REO Speedwagon, it wouldn't even tell you the name of the record. But at the time I didn't have any records. So I was like, okay, yeah, here, just give me something that I can listen to. And so there was a Wishbone Ash record in one of these boxes. And I was like, oh, cool. There's a Wishbone Ash record. Finally, I'm going to get to hear this band that my friend is always raving about. Steve Harris is always talking about. Well, the record that shows up in the box is Front Page News. I don't know if you guys are familiar with this record or if you've seen the album cover of this
Seen
record.
it.
Yeah, I don't have a copy of it, but as soon as I saw the cover of the record, I was like, okay, it looks like I remember the one guy, it made me think he looked like one of the guys in Starsky and Hutch. It just had this really weird, like 70s look to it. And I put the
Andy
record on
Powell.
and
Yeah.
was like, what? He's got the big glasses and everything.
Yeah.
I put the record
Andy
on and I'm
Powell.
like, what is this? This is like AM radio yacht rock, or it's just so mellow and like I hated it. And I was just like, I can't believe that what is going on here, that this is Wishbone. How in the world is Steve Harris influenced by this? And I mean, I stayed away from Wishbone Ash for years. It wasn't until my friend Matthias, my Swedish buddy, he's like, you have to get Argus. And I was like, I've already Wishbone Ash. No, it just doesn't work for me. It's too like, whatever. And he's like, trust me, go get Argus. And I went out and I got Argus and I was like, okay, now I get it. And now I know what Steve Harris was talking about. And I love the early Wishbone Ash records, but that particular album, Front Page News, is just terrible. I tried listening to it today just to refresh my memory, and I only got like 3 songs into it. It's like this dreadful, again, it's like Steely Dan, but like without the chops or anything. It's just like Super Tramp or something. It's just like totally bland AM radio, and it was just a horrible first album to get by them. And it caused me to, I mean, I almost had to, if Matthias didn't keep badgering me, like, dude, just, please trust me, go get Argus. Trust me, you will like it. It's okay. It's safe. I mean, it really scarred me to Wishbone Ash, but I'm a huge fan of them now, and I love Argus is an amazing record. I love that early stuff, but that was the wrong record, first record to pick up
For
by
sure.
Wishbone Ash.
I actually started with I hadn't heard them either, and I started with Wishbone 4. I bought it at Jerry's
Yeah,
Records
that's a
in
good
Pittsburgh
album.
on a whim, but at the time, like, I don't know if I just wasn't, again, I think I expected it to be a little bit heavier. I didn't realize like what the band was really about. And I listened to it once and thought it's okay. And then it was when I heard the live record and heard, The King Will Come and Throw Down the
Yeah.
Sword and some of those songs in Phoenix. I was like, oh, now. So I went back and then bought, the first three and went from there, Killer
Yeah.
band. They did a lot of good stuff.
Yeah.
I think mine was a best of, was the first one I ever got by 'em.
Yeah. Okay. Well, in the interest of keeping you safe out there, we're gonna have another go round, and we're gonna share with you a band and an album that would be a bad or not the best choice as an entry point. And sometimes, it's a good point that uh where you where you are in life too, like Butch, you said with that Angel record, maybe if you had discovered it later, but when you're a kid, I know how I was when I was a kid. I just made a video on this. Like when I was young, if it didn't have a lot of guitar, I didn't want to have anything to do with it. So there were a lot of records that I ignored because they were too keyboard heavy. And now later in life, I've, come around and I can appreciate, different things. But so sometimes it's where you come, where you are and your listening life and everything like that. But all right, Tony, so what do you got here for people, an album that people should avoid if they're going to get into a band?
One that came to mind, I don't even own a hard copy of it. I'd gotten into Alice Cooper and I had picked up several Alice Cooper. This is when I was, in high school. I'd picked up like Alice Cooper's Greatest Hits and Welcome to My Nightmare, more common stuff. But I would always check when you're in the record stores, check the cutout bins or the discount bins and see what you could find. And there was always this record that was in there or on cassette, and I still see it in stores to this day. And the album cover is great, but the record is just, you gotta avoid it. If you can see it here, it's called "Freak Out Song" by Alice Cooper. I pulled it up online.
Oh,
You can
yeah.
Oh,
barely
yeah.
see the "Freak Out Song" by Alice Cooper. Great live shot of him on the front, but it's pretty much a live bootleg recording of the band, the original Alice Cooper band. I think they were playing at the Toronto Rock Festival. Maybe was that 1969? So that was when I
Yeah.
guess when he ripped the chicken in half or whatever,
Mhm.
the famous tale for that. Um, and then there's some studio tracks on it. And I found out years later, I think it was around like 1995, we're hanging out with Michael Bruce from Alice Cooper's band. And I was asking him what the deal was with that record. And he said it was released without their consent. Basically had something to do with who owned the rights to the recording of the festival. But he said that the studio tracks on there weren't even them. It's not even Alice Cooper group. Which I found, I think it's two of the tracks are an Alice Cooper group. So it just sucks. I mean, it really does. It definitely is. If you were going to go, oh, this is Alice Cooper. I've never heard Alice Cooper. Oh, this album cover is great. I'm going to go home, and you're going to go, okay, I'm never listening to Alice Cooper again. This sucks. So
All
yeah,
right, so
"Freak Out
avoid
Song." Yeah,
Freak
so
Out.
and then, like I said, it's still out there. You can still find it.
Every truck
But
stop in
me
America
as
had
a
that.
collector, I don't even own a copy of it. I mean, the album cover alone is cool. I was like, I should buy this, and I go, nah, I'm not wasting $8 on this or whatever.
That's
Yeah.
funny. All right, Darren, what do you got?
There's so many albums that I thought of. I guess I'm going to go with Cold Lake by Celtic Frost. You could say, well, Turbo wouldn't be a good place to start if you're interested in Judas Priest, but Turbo has redeeming value. It's not classic Priest, but it's not a bad album. Innocence is No Excuse by Saxon. It's not classic sounding Saxon, but it's not a bad album. But when you're talking about bad albums by good bands, Cold Lake definitely rises to the top of that. I mean, it's like nothing else they've done. We talked about it when we were talking about our top 5 thrash metal bands or records. It's just an abomination. It's horrible. And anybody who's thinking about getting into Celtic Frost would probably be inclined because of the reputation that they have, or the pedigree that they have as being the seminal thrash, death, black metal band. If they were to make the mistake of buying Cold Lake thinking that they're going to get something that's like, oh, I don't know, the forerunner to like Bathory or something, and they put on Cold Lake,
Yeah.
man, they're going to be radically disappointed. So I would, as a public service announcement, I would caution anybody who is thinking about checking out Celtic Frost that hasn't yet, avoid Cold Lake at all costs. Steer clear of Cold Lake. In fact, I wouldn't even buy it. Like there's at least one black sheep record in every band's catalog, maybe two. But as you get into this classic stuff, as you wear into, like, well, Judas Priest. I mean, you start with like, oh, I don't know, British Steel, Hellbent for Leather, Sad Wings of Destiny, whatever. I remember when I got Rock and Roll, I was a little bit surprised by it, but I liked it eventually. I mean, and now I love the album. So I mean, there really isn't, and all the other examples that I picked out, I mean, there really isn't a bad album. It just depends on when you get into that band. And like the original, like the topic of our discussion here, we're just picking the wrong album to first get into the band. But Cold Lake is just an album that should not even exist. It just should be like the master tapes, every evidence, the graphics of it, everything should just be destroyed. It should just be wiped off the memory banks. Yeah, it's just like, this is horrible. It has no redeeming value. Somebody's probably going to put in the comment section that they love the album. It's their favorite Celtic Frost.
I love the album. I love it. I think it's great. I think it's nothing like anything they ever did. They changed on every album. Now, there's some bad stuff about it. The lyrical content is just terrible, but I think the riffs and the guitar solos are pretty bad too. They're like Vinnie Vincent on crack. But some of the riffs, they got some really good riffs. The drumming's good on it. But I just feel like it shouldn't been called Celtic Frost. It should have been another project off to the side. And I think that's what he kind of wanted to do, but the label kind of stuck him calling it that. That's been the excuse I've heard before. But yeah, I would definitely not recommend that album to somebody when I'm trying to introduce them to the band. You got to listen to Morbid Tales. You got to listen to to Megatherion, because that's just a totally different album altogether. It's like telling someone, go listen to Seventh Star as your first Black Sabbath record. I mean, it's
almost like these albums fall into three categories. You either have your UFO situation where it's the band's first or second record and they haven't found their sound yet, or you get the like Wishbone Ash thing where they're trying to, and the same thing with Angel, they're trying to have a commercial hit, so the band is like slightly changing their sound. Or you have like what's going on with Celtic Frost, which is where they just go off on some bizarre tangent where it should have been a solo record. Where, how often do you hear this where Jethro Tull, the A album, it was supposed to be an Ian Anderson solo record. This probably should have been a solo record. Seventh Star was supposed to be a solo record, and then it gets pulled back into the band's catalog, and it,
and there's like a whole younger generation that's all got into the classic metal. A bunch of them love Cold Lake. They love, they love, the old glam era Pantera and stuff like this. It's crazy. Cold Lake records, if you find them, they're very expensive if you find them online, because Tom didn't want to reissue it. I saw the first time I went to see them, and he and Martin were hanging out afterwards, and they were signing autographs. And I didn't bring my Cold Lake. I had it on CD at the time. I didn't have it on vinyl at the time, and I didn't bring that one. I brought some other records and got them to sign it. But somebody walked up with it, and he just wrote "Abomination" across their record, and then he wrote "I'm sorry" on one guy's record. It's just it was funny.
Oh man, that's hilarious. All right, Butch, what do you got for yours?
All right, well, man, some of the ones I thought about are just records that I don't think are like personally great starting points. I thought about Cold Lake, which, like Darren said, is not only not a good starting point, but probably not really a great record. So you guys have mentioned some of the ones, but there's stuff to me like I don't like, not that these records are bad, but it's like I thought about like this not being a great place. Now it's a great record, but it's not really a great place to start with Queensryche because it's kind of uncomfortable. Not uncomfortable is not really the right word, but it's unusual to listen to it. It's not immediate. It's like one of those records you're gonna want to listen to after you've heard The Warning and after you've heard Mindcrime, and then I thought about like bands like some people love Streets by Sabotage,
Yeah.
but to me, like by the time we got to this point, they were way too over the top. Like they weren't heavy anymore. And then even
it wasn't Sirens.
After this, like once you got to the Zach Stevens years, like I can't recommend any of those records really, other than Edge of Thorns for Chris's guitar playing. Like to me, without John singing. But the one I settled on, and I was trying to avoid, but it's a really good example of an album in a band's catalog where you don't want to start here, you wouldn't recommend it, is this bad boy right here.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're gonna try to introduce someone to Kiss, like you don't play them this record. Now let me tell you, I love this record.
I do too.
So do I.
I love it too.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I actually like, I found myself this is even over the last year, revisiting it more. And then I read a book about the making of the record. And so I was listening to it a lot while I was doing that. And like, I love the record even more now than, I'd done like a ranking of the albums on my Facebook page at one point, and this was in the lower half, but like, I'm telling you, man, this gets a lot of play, but I mean, if you're a kid that's into hard rock, like in the 80s, like my buddy Terry, we met, we became friends because we saw in junior high, we each had Kiss shirts on, and we're like, hey, you're a Kiss. There weren't too many Kiss fans at the time, like in the 82, 83. But he played this for me, and I was kind of like, well, for a while it was just like freaking The Oath was like the one, and I were the two songs on here that I thought were good. You could play The Oath for someone, but they'd listen to the rest of this record and be like, that sucks. Like, and a lot of people still hate this record and are hurt. They were hurt by it in their heart when this record came out. And I think the only reason it didn't get hurt people's hearts even more is because they were already on their downward trajectory. But I mean, I can't imagine anyone would recommend this first, but I know there's a couple of people that I've said this is their favorite Kiss album ever. So there's got to be a couple people that are like, oh, you haven't really listened to Kiss? Well, check this one out. And I can't think of a record that would turn someone off to the band more than this, other than, maybe if you're anti-grunge or that kind of thing, maybe Carnival of Souls seems to be divisive in the fan base. But I mean, this record is not like a hard rock record. There's a couple of hard songs on it, then the rest is like melodramatic, over the top orchestrations.
Meatloaf.
Yeah, I mean, it's
Meatloaf
just
Pink
art
Floyd.
rock. It's like they've always said, it's the band trying to impress everyone with how
and even if somebody likes it, it's not, doesn't sound anything like any of the other Kiss records, so it would be a bad place to start, because even if you like that record and then you go to explore the rest of Kiss doesn't sound like really that, so it would be just total bizarre.
You could say to somebody, this is a good album, but you could say this is a good album, check this out. But I mean, I wouldn't say this is where you should start. Are you interested in listening to Kiss? Okay, well, you should start here. No, I mean, you could say this is a really good album. It's sort of like maybe the hard rock equivalent of Quadrophenia by The Who or something like that. It kind of has a song cycle concept thing running through it, but it is so foreign to anything else Kiss has ever done. So if that was their first Kiss album and they really liked The Elder, and then they went from there and got Love Gun, they would hate Love Gun, I would think.
Yeah, totally. I have a friend that's all into power metal and prog metal, and he's not a Kiss fan, but that's the only Kiss album he owns. He likes it.
Interesting.
I see that. Yeah.
Darren, you froze up on us. Your audio is coming through fine, but your picture is frozen. I thought you were just staring Butch down because he,
Yeah.
Yeah, that's happening to me too. Yeah, that's happening to me
your
too.
picture is, but your audio is great. So you
Yeah.
can, I don't know. I
Okay.
mean, you can
Well,
log out and
well,
back in
I
if
hope
you
you
want,
enjoy.
but
I hope you enjoy my pose. I've got the elbow, and
yeah, you look good.
enjoy.
It's a good picture of you. So you can just leave it
Cool.
like that.
I'm looking at it too. It's not bad. It's not bad.
No, it looks good.
New profile
Yeah,
picture.
a little smile, nice smile there, Darren.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. Well, mine is going to be a Frank Zappa record, actually two Frank Zappa albums. I've been meaning to do a video on my channel about navigating the Frank Zappa catalog because Zappa has just a ton of records. I mean, I have no idea where it's at right now. It's probably in the like 70 some album range, dozens and dozens of live records. He has a very confusing catalog. And with that many records, you know there's going to be some albums in there that you need to avoid. So I actually have two of them. I'll tell you a funny story. There's a record store near my house called Sound Exchange, and they have a big CD section, used CD section, but it's broken up in a very odd way. It's got rock, but then there's a classic rock section. So I was in there one day and some like college kid, young kid comes up to me and he's like, "Oh, excuse me, can you tell me where the Frank Zappa section is?" And I said, "Well, I don't work here." And he's like, "Oh, I'm sorry." He goes, "No, that's all right. I know where it is. It's over there." And he goes, "Oh, cool." He goes, "Do you know any Frank Zappa music?" He goes, "Because I just had a friend play a couple songs for me and I loved it. And I really want to get into Frank Zappa." And this was like the moment I've been waiting for my entire life, right? Like the light shined down on me, and I
Da,
said,
da, da.
sit down, son, and let me tell you about Frank Zappa." And at that point, I like read a doctoral dissertation to this kid in the middle of the record store about Frank Zappa. But there's two albums that you definitely want to avoid from Frank Zappa. One is Cruisin' with Ruben and the Jets. This was done with his early band, The Mothers. And Frank Zappa is a huge doo-wop fan. He was always very much into doo-wop. So Cruisin' with Ruben and the Jets is a straight up doo-wop album. It's him, his love of doo-wop, making a doo-wop record. And if you get into Zappa and you're expecting Baby Snakes, or maybe you've heard Don't Eat the Yellow Snow or Peaches and Regalia, and then you buy Cruising with Ruben and the Jets, you're going to be like, what in the world did I buy like the wrong record or something? So that's dangerous one, number one. Number two is now Frank did a lot of different things. He has orchestral albums like The Perfect Stranger, which is his music being performed by the Los Angeles Symphony Orchestra. He has a group with this modern ensemble called the Yellow Shark. All that stuff is great. But he has a record called Francesco Zappa. And what that is Frank went and researched. I don't know how he did this. He found a composer from like the Baroque era named Francesco Zappa, and he found some of his music. And now it should be noted, when you think about classical music, you think about Beethoven and Bach and Mozart. Well, those guys were like the Led Zeppelins and the Deep Purples of their time. But there was a lot of other people that were putting out terrible, terrible music that you just never heard of them because there was no recordings back then. It just disappeared in history. So Frank somehow finds out about Francesco Zappa, digs up some of his music. He programs it into his synclavier, was like an early kind of sampling keyboard. So the sounds on it are just horrible. They sound like bell sounds and everything. And it's just this dreadful Baroque classical music. Do, 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 do. Do, 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 and it's just 40 minutes of this. And somebody who might make the horrible mistake. It has a cool album cover, but might make the horrible mistake of grabbing that as their first Frank Zappa record and probably wouldn't come anywhere near Frank after that. So I always tell people when they ask about Zappa, I say stay away from Cruising with Ruben and the Jets, stay away from Francesco Zappa, and a third one, if you're wondering, he did an opera that was called Thing Fish.
I was just gonna bring that up.
Yeah. Yeah, Thingfish is real. And I'm a huge Zappa fan, so I can kind of get through Thingfish. But Thingfish is like a 3 CD set. It's this opera about a guy who's a potato or something like that. I mean, it is really out there, even by Frank Zappa standards. And it's really hard to listen to. There's dialogue. There's like,
Head like a
yeah,
potato,
yeah, it's like totally,
lips like a duck, big
yeah.
old hands puffing up.
Yeah, it's really
I
tough.
want to talk about Zappa for a second. I like early Zappa. I like the Mothers, but I don't own anything beyond 1970. I think I go up to like 76 or 77.
Okay.
So the 60s Mothers through the 70s is, to me, that's prime Zappa. When you start getting into the 80s, things get a little bit like the examples that you referenced, things get weird. Um, and I've asked people have asked me where's a good place to start with Zappa, and I always say Apostrophe.
Yeah.
Apostrophe is a good place to start. Hot Rats, either one of those two, and then work your way around what came before, what came after. Work your way around those albums. But I mean, I'm also taking for granted that the people that are asking me are more interested in like rock
Hmm.
type of Zappa. Like they want to hear Zappa playing electric guitar. They want to hear, more of a
Yeah.
rock music version of Zappa. So, I mean, that's where I would direct those people. Beyond that, I mean, I couldn't even tell you the first thing about any of his orchestrated stuff. I don't listen to it. It's not really of interest to me. I like Frank Zappa as a guitar player. I think he's great. I love his style. I love his solos, especially on the song Apostrophe. It's brilliant. But I don't, I would never
Yeah.
listen to his uh, classical music and expect to get the same kind of enjoyment from it. But if somebody was interested in that, I'm sure that there's certain ones you could pull out from that era of Zappa as being better than other ones. So yeah, he's really an enigmatic musician in a sense where there's so many different eras and facets to him as a musician that it's like you really have to clarify. Well, I like Frank Zappa, and then somebody throws something at you like, well, no, I don't like that Zappa. I like
Yeah.
the early Zappa. Oh, okay, I got to clarify. But Cruising with Ruben and the Jets, that's actually a pretty popular album, and you're right. I mean, I wouldn't recommend that to somebody as their first Zappa, but I do like it. I think
Yeah,
it's
it's not
really
a
cool.
bad
It's
record.
well done.
It's a very well done doo-wop album, 50s
Yeah,
doo-wop.
yeah.
So it sounds like Sean and
Oh,
Na.
it's
So
fun
you get a
listen.
lot, yeah, you get a lot of do
Yeah.
do do better tonight, do, that kind of thing. Right, Bowser and everything. And
Do, do, do,
Frank
do,
does it
do,
from
do,
his
do,
heart because he
do.
truly loves that music. So it's
Does, yeah.
done in a very authentic way, but it's just and you're right, he has a lot. I mean, you could accidentally pick up his Shut Up and Play guitar record with box set, which I love, but it's just all guitar solos. It's like 3, 4 records of guitar solos. You could accidentally pick up Civilization Phase 3, which is electronic music and people talking into microphones sitting underneath a piano. You could pick up Playground Psychotics, which is recordings that he did on the bus with the Mothers of Invention. You recording the guys talking and stuff like that. It's like 60% of the record is just people talking. So his catalog is filled with all kinds of, dangerous places. But like you said, Apostrophe, One Size Fits All, that's another record that came out around that same
Overnight
time. Or maybe,
sensation.
yeah,
Overnight
Overnight
Doodle Wars.
Sensation. Those three are usually safe bets. If you get into the 80s, maybe Baby Snakes, that was kind of a somewhat popular one for him. But yeah, it's a story of like when he had the hit with a Valley Girl. How many people went
Yeah.
out and bought that record, and then there's all this, other weird stuff on. Nothing
That's
sounds
another good
like
example. Yeah.
Valley Girl,
Yeah.
it would be just to
If you
totally misled you. And
Yeah, if you go into a used record store and you're looking through the Zappa section, you're going to find like 10 copies of that people have unloaded because they bought it because it had the hit Valley Girl, and they hated the rest of the record, so then
Yeah.
they sold it, they took it in and traded it in on store credit or
All
something
the
like that.
moms
So
back then bought it for
yeah,
Christmas for their daughters or for their 12-year-old daughters. And then they get this record. It's like, what the heck is going on here? There's just that one song. So, yeah. All right. Well, there you go. There's some picks that maybe bad first picks that we experienced, and then there's some recommendations from us from albums that you should avoid. So let us know what you think of our picks. Maybe you have some suggestions for people. Help out your fellow rocker and metalhead out there. Give them some suggestions of warning. Avoid this record. So leave that all in the comments down below. Make sure you check out our Spotify playlist, the official Dudes Talking Metal Spotify playlist. Check that out. And we'll see everybody at the next Dudes Talking Metal.